The city had never seen fear like this, nor jubilation so dark. For the royals, it was their final nightmare, and the crowds could not get enough. Paris was alive that morning, but not with laughter. It was a city teetering on the edge of chaos. Cobblestone streets, slick from recent rain, reflected the early sunlight as a tense hush spread among the citizens. Whispers floated through the alleys. The royal family's fate was sealed, and the entire city seemed to be waiting for a spectacle. In the town square, Thomas, a young scribe, leaned against a pillar, pen poised over parchment. He had heard the rumors for days. The king and queen would be paraded before the people, subjected to a punishment so final, so public, that the whispers promised it would be impossible to forget. Merchants cautiously opened their stalls, but their hands shook. Mothers clutched their children tightly, afraid of what the spectacle might reveal. Even soldiers, tasked with maintaining order, moved with rigid precision, faces grim beneath their helmets. And slowly, inevitably, the crowd swelled. The royals were brought forward, their faces pale, eyes wide with terror. They were aware that nothing could save them now. The crowd surged closer, a living sea of anticipation, anger, and morbid fascination. This was more than justice. It was vengeance served with horrifying theatricality. A hush fell over the square. All eyes focused on the doomed family. Every flutter of a heart, every intake of breath felt amplified, as though the entire city held it collectively. Thomas could barely write. Every second seemed etched in eternity, and then it began, the first cruel act, designed not merely to punish but to humiliate, terrify, and make history remember. The crowd cheered not for justice, but for the spectacle. The royals, once symbols of opulence and power, were now reduced to human fear and vulnerability in front of thousands. If you're captivated by this story, like this video, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment telling us where and when you're watching from. Your support inspires more shocking and unforgettable historical stories. The first blows were symbolic, designed to shame the royals in front of every citizen. Their crown, once a mark of authority, was wrenched away. Their robes torn and dirtied, every jewel stripped from sight. Gasps and cheers intermingled, the square vibrating with a mixture of elation and terror. Thomas observed in horror as the queen's hands trembled uncontrollably, her eyes darting from one face to another, searching for mercy where none would be found. The king stood rigid, trying to maintain dignity, but even he could not hide the deep-rooted fear that clutched at his chest. The crowd's reaction was a spectacle of its own. Some yelled for more, some fainted in horror, while others wept quietly, knowing that this public execution would forever change the memory of their city. Flames from torches reflected off cobblestones, casting ghostly shadows over the scene, while smoke curled upwards, twisting and dancing in the early morning air. Every cruel detail was recorded in Thomas's notebook, ink smeared from trembling hands. He understood with sickening clarity that this event would haunt him and every witness for the rest of their lives. History was not just being observed, it was being created in blood, terror, and the cheers of a merciless crowd. The royals were led to the final stage, the execution apparatus standing tall, ominous, and unyielding. Silence fell briefly, broken only by the whispers of the terrified and the muttered curses of those who felt cheated by decades of oppression. And then the crowd erupted once more, their cheers louder, a grotesque celebration of cruelty that would echo through generations. The square had transformed into a theater of terror. Cobblestones gleamed under the midday sun, stained already with remnants of fear and sweat. The crowd pressed in tighter, a living tide of anticipation, anger, and perverse fascination. Mothers clutched children, merchants froze mid-motion, and soldiers stood rigid, maintaining an uneasy perimeter around the doomed royals. The royal family, pale and trembling, was guided toward the execution platform. Their luxurious clothing, once a symbol of wealth and power, had been stripped and dirtied. Every jewel, every ornament had been removed to strip them of dignity before the crowd. The king's jaw was tight, his hands clenched, but even his iron will could not mask the raw fear in his eyes. The queen's face was pale, her lips quivering, eyes darting helplessly among the sea of spectators. Thomas, hidden behind a stack of crates, observed every horrifying detail. Ink smeared across his notebook as he tried to record the scene, but no words could capture the magnitude of terror unfolding. Flames from torches reflected off the cobblestones, shadows danced across the buildings, and the occasional scream cut sharply through the tense air. Then it began. The first act of cruelty was swift, deliberate, and designed to shock the citizens. Chains rattled, guards pushed the royals forward, and the crowd's cheers turned into a mixture of horrified gasps and gleeful shouts. The king flinched at every motion, and the queen clutched her hands over her face, trying in vain to shield herself from the horror. The executioners worked methodically. Every movement was precise, each action designed to prolong the spectacle and maximize terror. The crowd reacted in real time. Some cheered, some cried, some fainted. The air vibrated with noise, a chaotic symphony of human emotion at its rawest. Thomas's heart raced. Every detail, from the terrified expressions of the royals to the gleeful faces of the crowd, was a lesson in humanity's darkest corners. He noticed how some spectators cheered not from justice, but from the thrill of witnessing absolute power humbled by fear. It was a grotesque mixture of fascination and cruelty. The royals were forced onto the platform, each step measured, each stumble met with jeers. The queen's eyes met Thomas's for a fleeting moment, a silent plea for someone, anyone, to intervene. But the spectators had no mercy. They had waited years, decades even, for this moment of retribution, and nothing could stop them from celebrating it with cheers that echoed through every alley and street of the city. The execution itself was meticulous and horrifying. Every motion, every strike, every ceremonial act of punishment was calculated. The crowd roared with every reaction, their cheers forming a grotesque chorus that amplified the horror. Flames from torches licked the edges of the platform, smoke curling through the morning light, adding a cinematic layer of terror to the unfolding scene. Even as the first blows landed, Thomas's mind struggled to process the event. He wrote feverishly, trying to capture every flicker of fear, every twitch of agony, every gasp from the crowd. The city itself seemed to hold its breath. Birds were silent, windows shuttered tightly, and even the wind seemed to carry the weight of what was happening. By the midpoint of the execution, the royals' terror had reached its peak. The crowd's cheers had grown louder, more frenzied, a mixture of satisfaction, rage, and morbid fascination. Some citizens could no longer look, turning away to shield themselves, while others pressed closer, desperate not to miss a single moment of history's cruel theater. And Thomas, notebook clutched to his chest, realized that he was witnessing more than punishment. He was witnessing a spectacle of humanity's capacity for cruelty, the power of collective emotion, and the chilling way history marks its unforgettable moments in blood and fear. The square was silent now, but the silence was heavy, thick with the echoes of screams, cheers, and terror that had filled the morning. Cobblestones, once pristine, were stained and scarred, bearing silent witness to the horrors that had unfolded. Smoke still twisted lazily from the torches that had lined the platform, curling through the warm afternoon air, creating ghostly, dancing shadows across the square. The crowd had thinned, but those who remained were visibly shaken. Faces pale, eyes wide, hands trembling. Mothers clutched children close, whispering prayers as though words could erase what they had seen. Men shook their heads, muttering in disbelief. No one could speak freely. The horror had stolen all words. Yet the story of the royals' final nightmare had been etched into every mind. Thomas, the young scribe, emerged slowly from his hiding spot. His notebook, ink smudged from shaking hands, held the record of a day that no one could forget. Every detail, the terrified expressions, the cries, the grotesque cheers, was written in trembling strokes. Yet even this could not capture the full weight of the events. The executioners were long gone, leaving only the echoes of cruelty and the haunting truth of human capacity for brutality. The royals had vanished into history, but their terror lingered. It was not just their fate, but the spectacle that would haunt the city, the citizens, and every witness for the rest of their lives. As Thomas looked around, he noticed subtle signs of life trying to return. Shopkeepers cautiously reopened their stores, children peeked out from behind shutters, and a few brave citizens walked the streets. Yet the square itself remained heavy with memory, the stones and walls carrying the imprint of horror. Paris, once bustling with daily life, now bore the shadow of cruelty. The story of that day would not be forgotten. It became a cautionary tale, a historical lesson, a chilling reminder of the thin line between justice and spectacle, between power and terror. Every eye that had seen the execution carried it with them. Every whisper spread the weight of the event throughout the city. This was not mere history, it was a shared trauma, forever marking those who bore witness. Even the architecture seemed to mourn. The towering palace walls, shuttered windows, and stone gates reflected the horror, as though the city itself acknowledged the gravity of what had transpired. Shadows stretched long across the square, mirroring the grief, shock, and indelible impact of that day. Thomas closed his notebook, hands still shaking. He understood that he had recorded a story that no history book could ever fully contain. The screams, the terror, the grotesque celebration, they could never be forgotten. And yet these stories were essential. They reminded the living of the fragility of life, the dangers of unchecked power, and the haunting consequences of cruelty celebrated as justice. As dusk settled, the city exhaled collectively. The memories of the royal family's final nightmare would linger, not as a tale of punishment alone, but as a reminder of human darkness, a warning encoded in history itself. The square may have been silent, but the echoes of that morning would haunt every alley, every stone, every whispered conversation for generations to come. The royals were gone, but the cruelty and the cheers of the crowd had carved a scar into history, a scar that would remain visible to anyone who dared to remember. And in that chilling truth, the citizens, the witnesses, and the scribe all realized, some spectacles are too cruel to forget, and some truths are too dark to ever fade.